It is. It is very personal. It's not some blanket thing where, you just hear about it and you don't get like in depth with it. Hearing it from a single person's perspective, it almost makes it matter more. And
welcome to Story Power, a new bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. And we'll give a few recommendations to you, our listeners. Beware, possible spoilers ahead. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. And as all good stories do, the world got even crazier. But as Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Since I believe that stories have the power to show us the way and give us courage to keep going, I wanted to see if that was true for my guests as well. You're listening to episode number 11. Today, my guest is my niece, Arielle Tate. Arielle, welcome to the show.
thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too.
Because your mom and I talk a lot about movies that we love and television shows and things, but I don't get to talk to you very often. So I wanted to know how you got hooked on stories.
The first books I remember reading as a kid were the Magic Treehouse books.
Oh.
That was like my first memory with reading. I was like 7 years old and I would always read them, and they were so fun, and it was always like a pleasure to read them because they would just allow me to escape, and they were so simple. They were never long, and you could just read them all the time.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
How many are in the series?
It's like an anthology, more like. It's about these two kids. They discover a magic treehouse, and they take them through time. There's at least 26 books about all their different adventures they've been on. I think I've only read 9 of them.
Wow.
There's a lot. And eventually I grew too old to keep up with them.
Because they're really for younger kids, right?
They are. Yeah. They're only like 70 pages long.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I still own them. I don't remember where they are, but yeah, I still have them.
Well, maybe when you have kids, you'll start the series again and you'll read all of them with your children.
Yeah, I tried to pass it on to Shane, but he's not quite into reading like I am.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has other interests.
He does.
Well, that's cool. So you started with the Magic Treehouse books, and then what did you graduate to after that?
I remember sometime after that, I can't recall any times that I wasn't reading outside of what was required in school. Mm-hmm. But around later in grade school, I remember reading the Percy Jackson books. I only got to the 3rd book, and I don't remember why I stopped. But yeah, I own that whole series, and it's going to be really exciting to see those books be given justice in the TV series that's going to be made on Disney Plus, because I remember really enjoying them and can now see how the movies didn't quite get them right.
Oh, yeah, the first set of movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another book I also read, how could I forget this one? The Invention of Hugo Cabret was one that I've read multiple times. I love it so much.
Yes, I've read that book. And I just love the way it was written. With the weren't there illustrations and then
Yeah, there's illustrations, yeah. And like the illustrations help tell the story. It's like showing like storyboard scenes,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then did you see the movie Hugo?
I did. I love that movie. The author has written other books, and I've read 2 out of the 3, and I haven't seen the movie for the second one yet, but I think the movie for Hugo got a lot of attention because it was directed by Martin Scorsese, and whereas the movie adaptation for his second book probably wasn't as widely known because it wasn't directed by such a big-time director.
Yes, I didn't even know there was a second movie. Yeah.
It's called Wonderstruck.
Yes, and I have that. That's one of the books I have on my wish list on Amazon, but I haven't got it yet. Yeah, and the movie, I mean, it was different genre
It
of
was.
movie for Martin Scorsese to be directing.
Mm-hmm. Considering what he does, it was but it inspired him. And
Well, and the thing I loved about that whole story was the showing how movies got started and actually giving credit to the real person
Mhm.
who made the first movies. And I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but I think it's Georges Méliès. And then, did you ever read the Harry Potter books?
I have, but I only got to Half-Blood Prince, and then we thought we were moving, so I packed all of them away, and I
And then,
haven't gotten the chance to read Deathly Hallows yet.
oh yeah, because they're all packed away still.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Deathly Hallows. I loved that one so much that I read it 3 times in a row.
Oh wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
I just loved it.
Half-Blood Prince is my favorite because I love hearing Snape's story.
You hear more of it too in the last one. So, any others that you really love?
Oh my gosh, I just love books. I definitely think I'm drawn towards series more. When I look at all my books, I have trilogies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ones that I've read most recently, about 2 years ago, was the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness, A Discovery of Witches, Shadow of Night, and The Book of Life. I read the whole trilogy in 3 weeks. I loved it so much.
You're the one who put me onto that, and now I can't wait for the second season.
Me too. I know.
The series of the TV series. Yeah. Oh, yes. I love that one too. And you are also, now, the reason I wanted to have you on the show was because you were the one who put me on to The Hate You Give. And so
Yes.
I recently read the book and seen the movie. I usually like to do it the other way around. I usually like to see the movie first and then read the books, because when I read the book first and then watch the movie, poor Barry, we were watching the movie and I was going, oh, in the book it goes like this. Oh, and this character was in the book and it's not in the movie. Poor, he wasn't upset with me or anything, but that's why I like to watch the movie first, because then I go read the book. It's like it fills in the details.
Yeah.
So what drew you to that book?
It was about 2 years ago. I was at Barnes and Noble, and I think it had just come out, and I saw that it, how other authors leave reviews for books on the back cover and stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite authors, John Green, left a review on it. So I'm like, if he loves it, then I have to read this. And so I read it, and it took me a while because it's so heavy, what it talks about. But every time I read it, I couldn't put it down. It was so captivating. It's a young adult novel, but it doesn't feel like it.
And yeah, because what I felt about it was that I was there. I was living Star's life with her.
Yes.
And I kind of understood the dual parts of her life, the two different parts of her life, and how she wanted to keep those separate, but it was too difficult.
Yeah, I like the moment when she realizes that both of her worlds can coexist. She used to think it was a struggle, but then when they come together, she realizes I could have had a much simpler life this whole time.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But oh man, I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be 10 years old and see your best friend gunned down by a drive-by shooting, and then when she's 16 to witness another one of her best friends being killed by a police officer. I mean, she had to be very mentally strong.
Yes. And I think her parents equipped her with that. I don't think if she had different parents, she would have gone through those two tragedies like she did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yes, I think that's true, because I like the way they contrast her parents with her brother's mom and stepdad, and contrast her with the relationships are so confusing. I tried to explain this to Barry and he didn't get it, but her brother Seven is also her friend Kenya's brother, but Kenya and Star are not sisters. So
Yeah.
it's so
They share
weird.
a half brother. Yeah.
Yeah, they share a half brother, right? But it contrasting Kenya and her points of view about life, and she goes to a completely different school, and contrasting her with Star. I mean, you can understand why each of them is the way they are because of the
Yes.
way their parents are. I thought that was interesting too. And I also thought it was great about showing the students at Star's school, Star 7 and her younger brother all go to the same private school. And like the day that they have the demonstration for Khalil, nobody knows that she was the witness and that he was her best friend growing up. And in the movie, they don't show it this way, but I loved that Maya and Chris and maybe 2 or 3 other students didn't do the walkout.
Yeah.
They didn't do the demonstration. They just went to all their classes, because they realized it was stupid.
The reason that the other kids were doing it was not really for justice. It was just an excuse to get out of school.
Right.
They warped the meaning of it.
Yeah. Which is sort of a, maybe I'm wrong, but it's sort of a white thing to do.
Yes.
Find a way to manipulate the system to make it work for you. I don't know. I'm probably wrong about that. It might just be a teenage thing to do. What else about the book did you like, or the book/movie?
I really like, I remember it more in the movie than in the book, but I like her relationship with her boyfriend, Chris.
Oh,
he's white, and he dates her, and sometimes she doubts it, because she's black, and he doesn't, say, oh, forget about your blackness. He accepts her, and I think that's the author. She paints both sides, like white people, that some of them are kind and some of them are like the officer who killed her friend.
Yeah.
She writes a story about black people, but she doesn't throw hate on all white people.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting too that she has the author made it so that Star has an uncle who's a police officer. His wife, Star's aunt, is a doctor, and they live in the same gated community as her boyfriend, Chris. They just live down the street from her boyfriend, Chris. I mean, that's interesting too. And her father doesn't want to leave
Garden Heights or something.
Garden Heights, yeah. He doesn't want to leave Garden Heights because he wants to help revitalize that part of town. And then in the movie, it doesn't happen this way. But in the book, they move because she's in danger.
Yes.
And the mom is a nurse, and she gets a job at her aunt's hospital, and it pays a lot more. But I love that the father decides to keep his grocery store in the old neighborhood.
Yeah, he learns that you don't have to stay somewhere in order to continue to make a change at that place. He thinks if you leave, you're going to abandon that cause. And he learns that you can still leave, but help them at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I love that too. The thing that I thought was so powerful about the movie that was different from the book was, what is her younger brother's name?
Sakani.
Oh yeah, Sakani.
Yeah.
Sakani is at the store when it's burning down. And at the end, and he picks up his father's gun, and he's going to shoot King, the gang leader. And that's not in the book.
No.
And then Star puts up her hands because the police have arrived and they have their guns out, and she puts up her hands and stands in front of her brother. And then her father does the same thing. And that, Barry said, oh, that's way more powerful.
Yes.
Now, I didn't think that it was not powerful the way it happened in the book. I thought it was good the way it happened in the book. But yeah, visually, that was very powerful.
Yes, of course, you were crying the whole time you're watching the riot scene and everything. But yeah, when that happened, I was fresh off of reading the book, and I knew that wasn't in there, and I thought it was incredible.
Yes, that was. I was sort of sad that they cut out, now I'm going to forget his name. Devante?
Oh yeah, he's not in the movie.
No, he's not in the movie. I missed him in a way, but I can see why they cut him out of the movie. But part of the reason why I missed him is because that whole thing when they're in Seven's car and he runs out of gas and they're talking about now the white people would split up and get killed or whatever. And then Chris teases them and says, now, I think we should split up and two of us should go get gas and two of us should. I just laughed at that part. I thought it was so funny.
Yeah.
And then he sticks with them.
Yeah.
He stays with them through the whole, he's in the store when it starts burning. I mean, that part was powerful about the book, that he's going to stick with them. He's going to stand up with them. Yeah, I liked it. I also liked it when he says, I see you. And then she realizes that he really does see her.
Because for a while she doubted it because he's white and she's black, and
right.
Because when her friend was killed, it made her question so much about her life.
It's such a powerful book. And the other thing that I loved about it, I was reading about it on Internet Movie Database. When they do previews of movies, the audience gets to rate the movie. They get to say A, B, C, whatever. Give it like a grade, like as if you're in school. It got an A+ rating. Almost every single person who saw that movie loved it. And that's very rare. That's very rare. Was there anything else about the story that you really liked?
I really like her uncle Carlos. Like you mentioned before, the author also showed Black people as successful. And Carlos, as a police officer and as a Black police officer, was put in a really a difficult position because he also had to figure out his dual life as a police officer and as a Black person. When she asks him, would you have shot Khalil? I remember in the movie, I think he hesitates in saying anything. And so then she sort of makes this assumption, but it's been 2 years since I've seen the movie, so I can't really say that for sure. But he also has this struggle, but he's always willing to help his family no matter what.
Yeah. Well, and I love that he takes in Devante.
Yes.
Who happens to be a gang member and wants out of the gang. Yeah. And I also think that that's really interesting that her father is the one that kids who want to get out of the gang, they go to him because he was successful at getting out of the gang.
Yeah. But not everyone can do what he did to get out of it. He was in a very rare situation where he could make King indebted to him.
Right.
Not every kid can do that.
Right. Yes. So, but that's how he made a difference, though, was to help those. And the other thing that I liked about it was, everyone's examining that right away when she goes to the police to make her statement. They're making it like, well, he was a drug dealer. Khalil was a drug dealer, and he was this and he was that. And no, there were no drugs in the car. There were no guns in the car. So whether or not he was a drug dealer really had nothing to do with the shooting. And she tries to get that across to them, but then they just sort of shut her down. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that. And the other thing that I love is that they show why he was a drug dealer. It was because King was coercing him into it. Like when her father explains, and I think she already sort of knows this, but he's reiterating that, well, this is how people get into gangs and become drug dealers. And it's mostly because of survival.
Yeah.
They
don't want to do it.
Yeah. And they don't, right. So I'm going back to that moment when she confronts her uncle, and I just saw the movie last week. So she says to him, if it was a white person in the same situation as Khalil and me, would you have asked him to put up his hands or would you have shot him? that's where he hesitates and he says,
Yeah.
I would have asked him to put up his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets a little upset with him. I don't remember that being in the book. What I do remember from the book was when she tells her uncle that the police officer held a gun on her until the backup came, even knowing she didn't have a gun. And then sometime later, they go over to his house and he has bruised knuckles and he's on suspension. He's home when he should be working. He's beaten up the police officer. It just shows it in a personal way through one person's experience, the kind of the circus that happens with that kind of situation and the injustice of it and how people use it for their own gain. And I mean, and then the turmoil that family and friends have to go through because of his death. So that's what makes it so powerful, is because it's not some news item. When you're reading it, it's like, oh, wow, it's on a very personal level.
It is. It is very personal. It's not some blanket thing where, you just hear about it and you don't get like in depth with it. Hearing it from a single person's perspective, it almost makes it matter more, and it almost makes you think about what you would be thinking in that kind of situation, because you are seeing something from a single person's eyes.
Right. And the other thing I loved about it was the love.
Yes.
The love of her parents for each other and her aunt and uncle, how much they love her and her family, and even the love of the friends. And that whole incident when Devante gets beaten up by King and Seven, that's in the book. It's a different, it happens a little bit differently in the movie, but when Seven gets the call and they go to get him, and then Seven's mother, she acts like, oh, get out of my house and take the girls with you. And then Star realizes, oh, she's getting us all out of the house, because when King finds out that Devante is gone, somebody's going to get beaten up and she's going to take the fall for all of us.
Seven, the whole book, thinks that his mother does not love him. And in that moment, Star realizes that she does. Yeah. But she loves him in a different way than Lisa and Maverick do. Right. So if his mom doesn't love him in the way that his other family does, then she doesn't love him at all. At the end, he does come to learn that what she just did there when they saved Devante mattered.
Yes, mattered in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other thing was Khalil's mom, who happens to be a drug addict, when she gets all emotional about her baby being killed, and Star gets really angry about that, and her mom says, no, he was her child. She carried him for 9 months. She loves him. Even if her life is messed up, it doesn't matter. And I just thought that was great too, because people love in different ways.
Yes.
And she didn't want to be messed up. She just was. Yeah.
And what Khalil did to start selling the drugs was to try to help her and his grandmother.
Yeah, the things we do for, when people are desperate, the things they do to help each other.
Yes.
It's just, I just keep thinking about that movie and that book. It's one of those that I'll probably go back and read again. I don't do that very often. Do you have any other books that you have read that affected you in sort of a similar way?
I can't really think of any. I could probably look at my bookshelf for a really long time and think about what all these books have done for me. And then there's also books that I've read at school, but I can't remember. I think it was my freshman year, we read Night.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's
Arielle.
Yeah, it's a very short, it's not a very long book, but it's so powerful.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I read that because I was going to be teaching about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it in one sitting. the part that I remember from that book the most is that night they have to, or maybe it's a whole night and a day. They're going on that forced march to another camp.
Yeah.
And then they stop. I think they stop in the middle someplace finally for a rest. And the violinist takes out his violin, and it's winter. It's dead winter.
Yeah.
And they don't have proper clothing or blankets or anything. But he gets out his violin and he plays this gorgeous music. And then in the morning, Elie Wiesel finds him dead.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe that this wasn't made up. This was written by a person who actually experienced it, and it, like, the gravity of it, it's sometimes hard to grasp. And I read that when I was like 14, and it's important to read, but
yeah, I didn't read it, and I'm not sure it was even written when I was in high school. But I think there's another one that he's written called Day, and I haven't read it yet. Gosh, yes. That's such a devastating book. And
yes.
It's funny that I did not read To Kill a Mockingbird in school. I don't know why I didn't. So I didn't even read it until 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. Did you read that in school?
I did. I forgot about that one. That was I think that was 8th grade, I think. When you go homeschooling, all your grade levels get mushed together, and I can't remember which year I was in. But yeah, I do remember reading that one, and that one, I think I don't remember if I wrote about that one. If I did, I don't have that paper anymore. But that's another one of those stories like The Hate You Give. I haven't seen the movie yet. I need to see the movie because it's been 4 years since I've read the book, and I haven't read it since, but I remember just thinking it was so good. Usually when you read books in school, you never want to read them because you're always on a schedule with it. You always have to finish it in a certain amount of time. It sucks the joy out of reading, but I really liked reading that one.
Yeah. I cannot believe that your mother has not made you watch To Kill a Mockingbird. Because our dad made us sit down and watch when we were kids, and it was one of his favorite movies. I think you will really like it because it's fairly close to the book. I did want to mention there are a couple of books that I really loved. I read them like 40 years ago or more. But Roots is one of them. Which was, I read it after watching the 1977 or something miniseries with LeVar Burton. Oh, it is a book that I still think about a lot because, of course, it starts with him getting captured and then the passage on the ship across what they call the Middle Passage. And that whole section of the book is just devastating. Is a word that I've been using a lot on this podcast, but that's the only word that there is for that. The experiences that they go through, crammed together in the ship, and then, of course, all the things that happen to Kunta Kinte. Well, they give him another name, which I cannot remember what it is. And his trying to escape, and finally they cut off part of his foot so he can't escape again. But his determination to continue to have dignity is passed down through the generations of his family. And so that part is really great. And when I watched the original miniseries, they have Alex Haley. They show him actually going to Africa because I don't know how he did this. It's really difficult tracing family lines when your parents were slaves.
Yeah.
But he traced them all the way back to someplace in Africa. I think it was Ghana, but I might be wrong. And they show him in Ghana meeting his family.
Wow.
I'm crying just thinking of it.
That's amazing.
It was really, really good. And then the other book that I have reread, is Shogun, and it's based on historical figure and historical events in the 1500s, where a British he's on a Dutch ship, but he's the navigator, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They call him the pilot. That's his title. And they go to Japan. The Portuguese have been there first, and they have their foot in the door with trade and things like that. Well, the British and the Dutch want to get in on this trade. Well, of course, it ends up that he's the only one. He becomes an advisor to this guy who eventually becomes shogun. But the whole thing I loved about it is getting to know the Japanese culture through Blackthorn's eyes. But it ended up that he did go back to England a couple of times, but he did not stay. He went back to Japan, and he lived in Japan, and I think he even married and had children there. I don't know what happened to his British wife, but he died in Japan. So and it was like my first immersion in Japanese culture, and there's something so opposite to the culture we have in the United States. There is a master, and everybody serves the master, but everybody has their specific role that they play in the whole structure of, his household or his fief. And so in a way that's kind of freeing because, you have this role, you know what your role is.
I'll have to read that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, Clavel wrote those books in the 60s, I think. There are several of them about Asia. Noble House is about Hong Kong and how the British were ruling Hong Kong. They're all really interesting. All take place in China or Japan. And I like that, I like books that help me see a different culture.
Yeah. The book that you recommended to me, The Children of Blood and Bone. So, yeah, I'm reading the second one, so I almost said the second book's name. It's a fantasy story, but it's based on the culture of real people.
Yeah.
It's based on their beliefs and everything. And it's really interesting to read it. And she creates such a great picture for it. At first I thought, I'm so used to reading books about white people. I'm going to picture them as white people for a long time. But, it didn't take me long to see them as Black people who dress with, not white clothing. And like I said, it's a fantasy story, but you can tell it's deeply immersed in its base culture. You learn a lot about the culture, even though it's not a historical book.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I have not finished the second book because in the second book, it's the poor teenagers. I feel so bad for them. The two sets of the brother, sister on one side and the brother and sister on the other side that are royal. They want to come together. They all have a plan that they want to bring their cultures together and heal the wounds and all that. But one misstep after another, or the adults get in the way. And,
they do. Yeah.
And we were in lockdown, and I just said, I cannot finish reading this. I need to read something fun and lighter.
Yeah, I got the same way. I'm still slowly reading it because it's so it's so frustrating because like you said, they all have the same goal, but just two very different ways about getting to it.
Yeah.
And and they think, especially Zelly, she thinks that the other side is wrong.
Right.
When she wants to kill Inan, and it's so frustrating because it's just you guys have the same mission.
Right.
And it's reading all three point of views, it's just if you could just read his point of view, everything would be okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that Zelly's brother doesn't have any magic, and all the rest of the three. What is this? What is Inan's sister's name?
Amari.
Oh yeah, Amari. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and Amari has a little bit different view than Inan, and then Inan, their mother gets in the way.
Oh yes, she's messing everything up.
She's horrible.
Yeah,
I'm gonna bonk her on the head. Well, and the whole thing is that somehow the mother and Iman and Amari's mother makes it so that Zelly doesn't trust them.
Yes.
So somehow the trust gets destroyed. Well, she's not the only one that destroys it.
Yeah.
Their father does too before he gets.
Oh yeah. At the end of the first book, everything falls apart because
oh right, yeah.
She thinks Zenon is exactly like his father.
His father.
Right. Yeah, and it just completely messes everything up.
Well, and her being tortured, I think.
Yes.
That messed her up. Yeah.
Yeah, and she thinks that Enon was complicit.
Right.
Yeah.
So
but
she's writing the third book. I may have to wait to finish the second book until
the third one comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm going to go in a totally new direction. I know that you like classic British.
I do.
How many of the Jane Austen books have you read?
I am sort of ashamed to say I've only gotten through part of Pride and Prejudice, but once I don't think I'm going to be able to finish the second book. I think I'm just going to move right on to finish Pride and Prejudice because I don't think I'm going to move through that second. But yeah, I've gotten to the part in Pride and Prejudice when Mr. Collins has proposed to her.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Are you listening to the audiobook with Kate Beckinsale?
Oh, I should. That's such a good idea.
Yeah. That's how I reread it the second time because it helps you understand what they're saying. Reading classic literature is a little difficult at first.
It is. When I first read Jane Eyre, I had to use an audio book because I'm like, it's like I can understand what you're saying, but it's just like reorder the words and condense it, and it would be a lot clearer to understand. And hearing someone read it to me was so much better.
Yes. Yeah. That's why I suggest that you get I think you might have, we all downloaded it, I think.
I think I have access to it.
Yeah. But I know that you watch a lot of classic.
I do.
What are your favorites?
Oh gosh, I have so many. I love all the Jane Austen. I've seen 2 Dickens miniseries. I think it's Little Dorrit and Bleak House. Oh. Those are both really good. Love North and South. So does Mom. I watch all these with her.
Yeah. North and South. Is that by Susan Glaspell?
Elizabeth Gaskell.
Oh, Elizabeth. Why did I say Susan? Elizabeth Gaskell. Right. I read Cranford.
We've also watched Cranford. Yeah.
I haven't read North and South yet.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed the way she writes. Yeah. So, what?
I also love anything by Julian Fellows. He's such a great writer.
Yes. The very first thing I saw of his, I think, was Gosford Park. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
Which Barry and I loved so much that we bought the whole series. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we also own Gosford Park. And then I loved that he hosted, I'm not sure he wrote the screenplay for it, but maybe he did, Dr. Thorne. And it was an Amazon original.
I love Dr. Thorne.
I know. And then I read the book. Mm-hmm. It's really good.
Yeah.
Both of those, the miniseries is good and the book. Yeah. And then your mom was saying, did I have a suggestion for a version of Middlemarch? I don't even know if there is more than one version, but I saw the miniseries, I think it was late 90s. I loved it so much that I bought the book and I read it. But the book is like 800 and something pages.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And she takes like a third of the book to set everything in the town up, all the relationships with the people and how the doctor arrived. He's not, he didn't grow up there. He came there for a specific purpose because he wanted to do research on something that was going on in that area. And, it's so then once the story actually gets going, it makes it so much richer because you understand why this person is doing this thing or why this person decides to change his life or why Dorothy is the main character, why Dorothea marries this older guy who's writing this long volumes and volumes of something or other, which I'm not sure we ever really know what it is. And he treats her really well, and he like listens to her. But then when they get married, it's like he just shuts himself in his study and he doesn't let her help with the work, because that's why she married him. She wanted to help him with his work. And it all makes perfect sense why I'm talking about George Eliot now, why she set it all up that way. And I'm reading Daniel Deronda now by her. And she sort of does this. She's doing the same thing. She's sort of setting it up.
Yeah, because I think understanding characters allows you to enjoy the story more, because you don't want to see a character make a decision that appears totally out of line, because then it doesn't make any sense and it's confusing. Taking the time to set up a character is really useful, even if it does take a lot of pages.
Yeah. Well, it's just her style, I guess, because there are other authors who do it in different ways.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting. It took me a while to get used to reading classic literature.
Yeah.
Although the first one that I just fell in love with was when I was a senior in high school, and we read A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. And I just loved that book. And of course, we read some Shakespeare. We read Jane Eyre. We read, what else did we? It seems like we read two Dickens. Oh, I think Great Expectations was the other one that we read. And I liked both of those.
I haven't read either of those yet, but I definitely want to, after watching those two miniseries of Little Dorrit in Bleak House. He has such an interesting way of writing. When I was watching Little Dorrit, I'm like, I'm not going to like this. This is weird. And then I kind of had to remove that expectation of like a Jane Austen style. He's a completely different author, and he's not going to write like her.
Well, for one thing, he's a man.
Yes.
And for another thing, Charles Dickens did have some of the experiences of some of his characters. Like Oliver's the name of the musical, about the kid who grows up in the orphanage. Well, that's kind of, not exactly, but kind of what happened to him.
Yeah.
He had to go work in as a child, he had to go working in this boot black factory because his father went bankrupt, and his father was a gentleman. But so it's interesting that we both like classic books and movies, and we also like more modern stuff, like the MCU.
Yes, I think I surprise people with the different genres of movies and books that I like. A lot of people I meet are like very limited, like they only like superhero movies and that's it. And I'm like, well, I like this and this and this and like this endless long list. And I think I really surprise people.
Yeah. And the things that you like to study, anthropology, right? That's your field that you like.
Yes.
Yes. That's not kind of a normal sort of thing for people. The students at my college, they're all about the degrees that can get them a job instead of something that makes you is more contemplative, or examining what happened in history.
I've never really thought that way, though. Just to exist, just to find something to get you through life. I've always had this view that I should do things that I love to get through life and not just do whatever gets me there. Yeah. So I never went to school with like, okay, I'm going to be like a teacher because that'll give me money. I was never like money as like my idea.
So do you have a movie or a book that you would like to recommend, something maybe that we haven't talked about that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
I read the first 2 short story books of The Witcher. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think they're really good books. I haven't gotten to the full novels yet, but I read them in preparation for the series, and they're sort of difficult to read because they're translated from Polish. So it's not written in like linear English. It's sort of in like it's not as clean, but I think they're really good. You know, fantasy stories don't mean that they're not about real people and who have their people think that if it's a fantasy story, then it's like, oh, those aren't real people. They don't feel like the rest of us. And I think The Witcher is a really good book.
Yes, that does look interesting. I gravitate toward fantasy a lot. I did mention Naomi Novik to one of my guests, but there are two books that she wrote after the His Majesty's Dragon series. And the first one is Uprooted, and then the second one is Spinning Silver. And they're both based on Eastern European folk tales. Then there's another author who's written another set of, and they're based on like Russian folk tales.
Yeah.
Bear and the Nightingale is the first one of that. And those are so interesting because I didn't really know anything about Middle East. Well, Spinning Silver is supposedly about Rumpelstiltskin. But there's folk tales that I really had never heard of before. So those are interesting. One of the books is The Girl in the Tower, and it's Catherine Arden. The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and then there's The Winter of the Witch is the other one. Those books are so interesting. And then I know that you read the first book of the Circle of Caradwyn books.
Yes.
But you said you didn't like the way it ended, so you weren't sure you were going to read any more of the books.
I think I've reconsidered. You know, when you kind of get frustrated when books don't go the way that you wanted them to go, but, you know, it's not up to you how they happen, so you just have to go with how it goes. And so I've kind of gotten over, you know, I went into it with an expectation and it didn't meet it, so then I hated it. And so now I've rethought it and I'm like, all right, it was actually a really good book. I should really get back to it.
And the thing that I found interesting about that whole series was I had this erroneous view that it's a historical series, that the Middle Ages were these dark, dank, wet, I don't know. It was a dark time period. Well, no, it was, there was vibrant trade. There was, you know, all this really interesting stuff that she did, the farming practices and festivals. And I just found all of that so interesting. And the series of the books does eventually probably get to where you want her to go. But she's working on the Octavia Randolph is the author. And about a year or two ago, she up and moved to Gotland. I had never even heard of Gotland. I didn't even know what it was until I read about them in the book. And it's an island, it's part of Sweden, I think. But it's an island in the Baltic Sea. I think it's the Baltic.
Oh, wow.
And I'd never even heard of it before. So it was like, oh, wow. So I was learning a lot while I was reading the whole series.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely pick it up again. It's been a long enough time where it's just like, I know why I stopped doing it, but it's also just like, why'd you have to be so petty, Arielle? You could have kept going.
Well, you were, you know what? You were 15 when you read them.
Yeah, I was younger than I am now, yeah.
Yeah. So I totally understand why you kind of got that way. Yeah. Because it did go in a direction that I was completely not expecting at the end of the first book. And so, but, you know, in a way it was kind of neat because this is all before England becomes one unified country. And so we got to see what Wessex was like. Yeah. As opposed to what is now northern England. And so, that was kind of cool. Okay, well, I have had fun. Do you have anything else you want to say?
I don't think so. You gave me so many great book suggestions. I've written them all down.
Well, you have given me great book suggestions in the past, and The Hate
Yeah.
You Give is one of the best suggestions you have given me. I will
Hmm.
always be thankful that you said, you need to read this, or you suggested that I read it. And you and your mom suggested Daniel Deronda to me, and I'm so glad you did because I loved the miniseries, and now I'm reading the book. Thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been fun.
Yes, it has. I thank you for asking me to do this.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. You can leave comments there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.